So now when we start talking about how the common good is the end of politics, right? We're not talking about the distribution of resources. We're not talking just merely about sort of peace or something like that. We're talking about the enjoyment of a relationship together of happiness. So that I guess is a sort of foundation, so the basis for a profoundly non-liberal or post-liberal politics.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how, and this is fun for me. Jacob's like, come out here and do this.
Uh-huh.
He didn't really tell me what I'm doing. I think he did that on purpose. So
Probably.
it would be just organic.
I had no idea what I was doing today either.
Yeah.
So normally I have a topic.
So when he says come up with something political, and then I made a joke about the current state of the political climate, and then him and Josiah both are like, oh, that not those kind of politics.
It's okay.
More metaphysical. What does that even mean?
What they're talking about is sort of a fundamental philosophy or theology of politics. So what is politics? What is the human person, that we're political creatures? How are politics integral to our understanding of Catholicism and what the Christianity is? Those sorts of questions. Now, we can talk about the current environment as a segue into that. That would be okay. If you want.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would ask what you would perceive the current environment to be.
Okay, so this, and by the way, we're starting. This is happening. This is good.
Okay.
This is good. I think this is good
because that's one. Yeah, that's a question that has to first be answered.
Yeah. So I don't want to make an assumption about a majority of the people in the United States, but I think I'm going to here. I would say the majority of the people that I have met and interacted with on a daily basis. So not a lot of people. Your average Joe walking down the street would not even understand half of what you just said. A theology of politics that we're a political creature. Mm-hmm. Like it's just not language that like I've heard at and I've studied philosophy and theology, so right. I have heard it there. But don't you think it's important for all humans to have some type of philosophical, theological understanding of the human person before we can even start talking about politics in general? And why do you think that's not a thing we're talking about as much anymore? As a country.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure how important it is that every individual has an explicit understanding. I think there's always an implicit understanding in the culture at large as to what we are and what we're doing.
Okay.
Right. So I think in our culture, because we come out of liberalism and almost like a pure form of liberalism, most people assume that humanity is first individuals, like a sea of individuals, a sea of sort of desiring creatures, right? We have desires and then we try to figure out how to satisfy them, and we interact with each other in the pursuit of those desires.
Okay.
Right? And most people, I think, then assume that the political world is this second order series of compromises and deals and contracts that we're making with each other in order to try to figure out how to satisfy whatever it is that we happen to want.
Okay.
In which case politics isn't a part of our nature. Politics is a strategy.
Yeah.
Right? Like we have things we want. We want pleasure fulfillment. We want material comforts. We want even good things like companionship or something like that. And then politics becomes means towards those ends. A mere, you see what I'm saying? Like a sort of secondary strategy. And this is rooted in the founding of modernity, or the whole social contract theory, Locke, Hobbes, all of that.
So, go into that. Yeah. This is great.
So, the founding moves in modern political theory, there's at least in this strand of it, the sort of liberal strand that we're talking about. If you think about John Locke, he's a perfect example, is that he conceives of the state of nature where you have a sea of individuals. He thinks of them as being property owning or property producing individuals. So they're working on the world and making stuff for themselves to then consume. Okay. Right. And then you have a world of those people, and then they encounter problems. And the two main problems they encounter. The first one is that other people are a problem because other people might try to take your stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Then the secondary problem is that you can produce more and consume more if you cooperate.
Okay.
All right. So there's two problems. One's defensive, and one's sort of offensive. I guess we could say those two things. And so the political world comes into being when people in that state of nature face those problems and say, hey, we could accomplish more. We could both protect ourselves more if we enter into a deal where we form an army and a police force or something that will protect our property. And then we can also produce more property if we work together. Now, those are directly related because the production of more property and more consumption has to do with protection, right? So like you have the idea, I own this property. I'm not scared of losing it. I have a safety, sort of secure environment where I can own it and I can enter into trades with other people. And there's an umbrella of power that is making it so that those trades are safe, right?
Okay.
You see, like there's a place where we can do this.
Yeah.
All right. So again, that means that there's a sort of metaphysical or anthropological assumption there, which is human beings don't need other human beings. Essentially, we don't need each other, or we're not sort of prior to our existence already bound up together, right? We enter into relationships after the fact.
Okay.
Right. That's an essential component to what's going on. And then the other side is that, or the other conclusion is that social thing is always a compromise. All right. So you're making deals, you're trading away. So if you imagine this primordial individualistic society, it's not a society, this situation where human beings are all property producing and trying to consume the property for themselves in pursuit of their desires, they have total freedom, including the freedom, and this is where you get into Hobbes' more sort of astute understanding, the freedom to steal from each other, right? No one's stopping me. If I feel like I'm powerful enough, I can take your stuff, right? I have total freedom.
Yeah.
And that is, you trade away aspects of your freedom in exchange for other goods. Okay, so society is always a compromise.
Okay.
Right? It's not so you're making a deal. That's what makes it a social contract. You're making a deal from the very beginning.
Yeah.
You're giving up something in order to get something else. All right, so that conception of politics is not, I mean, politics becomes, I mean, there's no reason sort of essentially for us to even have it. It doesn't make any sense for us to talk about us as political animals. Politics is no different than any other tool.
Okay.
Right? It's like we build hammers because it helps us pound nails, but we wouldn't think that we're essentially hammer creatures.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so and that politics becomes something like that.
Fascinating.
All right, so I think that's the basic liberal understanding. So you have what flows out of that, I think very clearly, are things like the conception of rights that we have, where rights become these sort of negative rights. So what, you have a right to private property, say, but what that means is that no one else can take it from you.
Okay.
Do you see? It's a negative right. It's a right over and against your fellows.
Sure.
You have a right to free speech, which all that means is that someone else is prohibited from stopping you.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that whole language of negative rights is again rooted in this idea of society as a compromise.
Yeah.
So something like that.
This is like, oh my goodness.
So the difference then, well, I mean, I'll let you answer or ask the next question, but there's when you think that human beings are political in their nature or social in their nature, then you're saying, okay, if human beings are pursuing some sort of end, which is just a sort of classical philosophical way of understanding human action, that we always act in light of some objective, right? Yeah. We're acting for some reason. Then what is that end? And philosophically, the tradition has answered that with the word happiness, which feels sort of simplistic, but when you think about it, it's like, yeah, okay, we're all pursuing happiness. We all want to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. So then, and everything we do is aimed at happiness. It's sort of a tautology, but So then you have to ask the question, well, what makes us happy?
Yeah.
And when you start answering that question, then you're getting at our nature, because like Aristotle and then the whole tradition asserts that you know what something is by its end, by its telos. What is it it's pursuing? Mm-hmm. So what makes us happy? I know when I ask my students and I say, try to imagine happiness, try to imagine being happy without other people. Like when you say, what is a happy person? I have to take my theology hat off for this, because my answer would just be that you can only find happiness enjoying Christ, which is another person.
Yeah.
I mean, so even that ultimate happiness, which is the beatitude.
Yep.
All right. To rest in communion with God is communion, and God is exactly persons. The Trinity, to be elevated into the life of the Trinity is to be elevated into relationship. Mm-hmm. Right, so even there, that's not an exception. That's actually the perfection of the notion that it's relationship that is what makes human beings happy.
Yeah.
So what that means is, if you think of, okay, a happy person, let's keep it on earth for a second. And you say happiness is being in a relationship with whom? And it's like, well, can one imagine being happy with other people who are not happy?
Right.
No, it's like happiness is happiness together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you say, I mean, just simple sort of cultural tropes that are true because they come out of our nature are things like happiness. Think of, romantic love, the man and woman fall in love and they're totally immersed in each other's being and together, and it can be kind of Hollywooded up and silly, but if you think about it, there's a real philosophical truth in that the happiness of that sort of true love is that it's shared.
Yeah.
Right. So in our stories, when it's not shared, it's a tragedy, right? When we think one person loves and the other doesn't, that's like an example of almost like a misery.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so then we say, okay, well, happiness is something that's had together, or it's not had at all. Well, once you do that, you can see what we're already defeating Locke, right?
Yeah.
So happiness then is not these relationships that are our end are not a compromise in pursuit of whatever our end happens to be. The relationship is the end, right? That's what we're after, is a happy relationship with others.
Yeah.
So when we start, that allows us to start talking about things like the common good. So in our culture, people say common good, and because we're liberals, we think greatest good or distributed good or the greatest good for the greatest number or all these sorts of formulas. Mm-hmm. But when we say common good, when the Catholic tradition says common good, we mean exactly what I was just describing. We mean that good or that end that is only had when it's had in common together. Yeah. That's the only place to have it. So the obvious example is something like a happy family, right? Where a happy family is only a happy family when all the people in it are enjoying the good of a happy family.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's a common good.
Yeah.
So now when we start talking about how the common good is the end of politics, right? We're not talking about the distribution of resources. We're not talking just merely about sort of peace or something like that. We're talking about the enjoyment of a relationship together of happiness. So that I guess is the sort of foundations or the basis for a profoundly non-liberal or post-liberal politics.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you think? So first of all, I think in general, everything that you just said, like that, I feel like that is something that we should be talking more about. The way that you just laid that out, I feel like the average person on the street should be able to know that. Don't you think?
I do. And do you think they do know it? Like when someone says it, don't you think most people are like, well, yeah, obviously that's right.
So then you're saying
that's awfully simple. That's awfully true. I mean, and one of the tricks of modernity and of liberalism in particular is that they can say, or they attempt to say something like, everything you just said is fine. That's true. That all happens in the private life. right? Like the political world is this sort of umbrella compromise world that allows then private individuals to pursue relationships or whatever, and that's where your happiness is found. That's fine.
Okay.
Right. So they might say something like that. Now the problem with that is that it tries to. Sometimes people will describe liberalism as a philosophy of separations, right? And that's here we can see that, right, where you're saying something like happiness is had. Even if you want to concede what I just articulated, you could say happiness is had at this little level of interpersonal relationships, family, marriage, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's no such good at higher levels of order, and the higher levels of order are these sort of coercive, power-based compromises.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So now you've put into humanity a sort of division, right? So the genius and the beauty of the tradition is that no, there is no such division in human nature, but rather happiness. The pursuit of happiness is a pursuit that builds in scale. Okay. So if you look at something like a happy family is a perfect example. Like, does a happy family, is it capable of the perfection of its happiness if it isn't bound, say, in a culture that has beautiful art, say? Okay, this is an exception or an example. So you say, no, I mean, a family that could be happy would be happier if they could enjoy together beautiful art, or if they can enjoy together, say, a language, so they can speak to each other. Well, they don't invent the language. The language comes from a higher level of order. Okay. Right? Art comes from a higher level of order. History, who we are in our persons, like the content of our personalities, isn't something that merely comes from a family. It comes from a higher level of order. And so if you say, okay, happiness is had in families, that's great. Now let's imagine a family stranded on a desert island together. It's like, are they capable of happiness? Well, yeah. I mean, a degree of happiness seems like, but would they be happier if there was another family?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, right?
For sure.
And would those two families be happier if there were five?
Yep.
I mean, are capable of happiness, right? And so you have the human space that we share, which is the place where we share these friendships, which is the traditional understanding of a relationship of happiness. Friendship is the word, and you have to have a very expansive understanding of friendship, right? So it includes a father and his son, and includes a husband and wife, and includes friends. Yeah. That the world that in which friendship takes place is integral to the friendship. What we share, what we discuss, what projects we're engaged in together. These are the content of our friendship. Yeah. And so that happiness that's had in those interpersonal relationships becomes deepened and complexified, becomes better, as it becomes sort of integrated into bigger levels of order. Yep. All right. So that now we're building towards a political regime. Okay. So now that the common good that we said was there in the family, was there in the husband and wife, now is also there when we have 4 or 5 families, is also there when we have the city, is also there when we have bigger order. Yeah. Right. And now in the tradition, that would continue all the way to all of humanity in the ideal. I mean, if sin didn't mess everything up, right, we could imagine all of humanity sort of building out in this sort of hierarchy of friendships and of happiness, to involve everyone, which is, of course, including then, like we started with, the persons of God, God as well, the communion with the Trinitarian God. And then we're talking about the church, right? The universal.
So one of the things that we've agreed upon and said especially after your intro, was that we are, as human beings, we want happiness. Mm-hmm. We believe that happiness comes from being in community with one another, being in a relationship, and then those communities grow and get larger and larger, and we can get into. We're talking a lot about politics. We get into the church as being universal, the community, right? And we have the separation of church and state. Yeah. Where has that come in? Where did that start? And what does that look like now? Because I don't think we could have had the whole conversation we had if we're not Catholic. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that conversation ends. That if Jesus is the answer, Father, that being in relationship with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that transcends the happiness we can have here on earth. Where the separation of church and state, what's that all about?
So, okay, there's two. I'm going to come at it in two different. There's two steps to this answer.
Okay,
it's a very hard concept, so I'm going to do the best I can here. Okay, so first, the idea that this modern notion of religion as some private thing that has to do with basically your idiosyncratic morals and your, like, where you go when you die. I mean, that's basically the way John Locke describes religion. Okay, it has to do with what the afterlife, and it has to do with like whatever it is that you happen to value in your private life. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that has no place in any of this thinking whatsoever. All right, that whole sort of concept of religion just needs to be discarded.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is human happiness, and the reason why we're unhappy, right? The reason why we're prone to unhappiness is because of the fall, sin. Sin disorders us. Sin. So if you think about the garden before the fall, what we live together, Adam and Eve, their children, they live together. They are building out a community. That's the commission to multiply, right? To be fruitful, to multiply, to subdue the earth, to build out the community, and they're walking with God, right? They're actually full of grace, so they're elevated even beyond their natures into the life of the divine. And so this world that they're building, right? That imagine without the fall, the world that they're building. The social order of increasing complexity of happiness is the church, right? What would the distinction be, right? Yeah. Like the church, the grace that's flowing into that community is what's enabling them to achieve the virtues, to achieve the love, to achieve these objectives, and to elevate beyond what they could even do naturally, into the life of God. Okay, so when you start talking then about, well, how do we rebuild human community? How do we rebuild politics? And it's like, well, the only way for that to work after the fall, the only way, and even before the fall, but it doesn't matter, in our current situation, which is post-fall, is to cooperate with revelation and with grace. Revelation teaches us what's true, right? Grace enables us to live what's true. Mm-hmm. So it is exactly the combination of revelation and grace, or the healing of the intellect and the will, which enables us to fulfill our nature, right? So if we're social and political in our natures, and our nature is exactly what falls in the fall, then the redemption of the political and the social is integral to the redemption of humanity.
Sure.
And the redemption of humanity is what we call the church. I mean, that's what the church is the redeeming of humanity. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this whole vision that we have is a vision of the healing and elevation of mankind, which it is the mission of Christianity. Now, within that, though, so right there, we kind of like just repudiate straight up the liberal division of church and state. Okay, right. It's just not relevant. It just doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean though that that doesn't mean that the church is the state in the ideal. Okay, it doesn't mean that. I mean, it is in a sense. Let me try to figure out how to answer this. So, the church is divided into three orders. There's the clergy, there's the laity, and there's the religious.
Yep.
All right, three orders of vocation, and they each have their role to play in the church. And the role of the laity is what in a healthy society is what we would think of as the political. Okay, yep. Right? So what do the clergy do? The clergy preach, and they confect the sacraments. They bring us revelation, and they bring us grace. The religious pursue perfection. They pray. They are sort of living martyrs that make hope real in the world.
Yep.
Okay, and are an influx of grace through them into the community. All right, but the laity are the ones who order the world. Right, we're the ones who build things, who farm the land, who organize ourselves.
Yeah.
And even if we imagined a world without sin, which is impossible. But even if we did, the laity would be the ones who did those things. And that would require organization. It would require authority. It would require hierarchy. It would require the things that we think of as being political.
Yeah.
Okay, so there would be, so the political is the sort of vocation of the laity. When sin enters in, now we have not just those positive things, but now we have remedial action, right? We have to deal with criminals. We have to deal with discipline. We have to start using coercion, force. Yeah. And that then again is the role of the laity, not the clergy. In fact, canon law forbids the clergy to pick up weapons, for example, but the laity must be willing to do that. And so if we talk about the division of church and state, if we're moving into a Catholic frame and not a liberal frame, then we can start talking about, well, okay, if what we mean by that is the vocations of the laity and the clergy, then yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but if that's what we're talking, but they're all the church.
Yep.
Right? The laity are the church. In fact, the laity are only laity because they're baptized and catechized and are receiving the sacraments, right? Like that's what makes them the laity.
Yeah.
Right? Other than being just heathens or whatever. And so that the laity's political vocation is a vocation within the church. But now we're expanding our conception of church to include multiple orders. Whereas most of the time these days, I think when people say church, the church, they tend to be talking about the priests and bishops.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're not talking about the priests and bishops being the kings and the congressmen and the policemen. Right? Those are the laity.
Yeah. That's where that came from. That's like the origin of church and state.
Absolutely.
It was a Catholic thing before it was like a world thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't use those terms, but so in the Middle Ages, it was, I mean, a common thing you would see in the Middle Ages is that just like how the Trinity is three persons, the church is three vocations. There's the laity, the clergy, and the religious, and they each have their own law, their own function in society, but the whole is the church.
Yeah.
And that includes intrinsically then all the political activities as well as the sacramental activities. It's both, it's combined. But that works, that's the only way to make sense of it when we talked about the anthropology we talked about earlier.
Right.
With the smallest thing being the beginnings and then it growing out all the way and human relationships and human happiness being one end.
Yeah. Right?
Like we have this end, which is human happiness. And that's Christianity is ordered to that end.
Yep.
So of course it's integral. It's integral. The political and the ecclesial are integral to each other. Even though not identical, right?
Sure. Yeah. Do you would it be fair to say that so yesterday we learned that New Polity is like new city and building really the kingdom of heaven here on earth now.
Right.
Do you think that those two things are really go hand in hand? Like that what New Polity is trying to do is to, like you just said, bring that happiness to all of humanity by living out what we're doing, what the church is telling us, how it works.
So this is the reason why sometimes New Polity will be criticized by people because they think we focus too much on the small stuff, like families, relationships, even the city, New Polity, new city. And they're like, well, we have these big fights and the politics and the, Washington, D.C. and, the World Economic Forum and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, all that is true. But in the way of thinking that I just articulated, it's like it all starts with friendship, right? With human relationships. And that's the foundation from which these higher levels of order are built, but also that the higher levels of order have their own end in the deepening, the thickening of friendships. And so when you live in a really profoundly disordered world, you have to look at where you have power, right? Like where you have the ability to affect your world and pursue the common good. Order your life to the common good in the place where you can, right? And the place where we can is here, right? Is in our families, in our relationships, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And not because we think that those are self-sufficient, not because we think that the rest of the world doesn't matter. It's that's where we can build communities of the common good which are political communities, and then seek to really they become sort of beachheads for evangelization, right? Like these then become the places that out of which first of all missionaries can sort of expand out, right, to sort of expand it, but then also beacons of hope for the world, right? Like and this is, if you think about the early church, you see this in the Roman Empire, where the communities of Christians, and you think about, if you read the sources, the way in which the Romans talk about the Christians is that they are communities, and they're remarkable because of how they love each other and how they care for the poor. And everyone's like, wow, what is this? This is weird, right? And it's very interesting to people, and so because it's an alternative, right, to the world. And when you have, so those communities then become they're not missing the point. They like are the point, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we emphasize it. If you're not, if you don't have friendships, family and friendships, there's no sort of ground for even political goods to land. Like it would be unclear what the objective of the political would be if it wasn't to make people happy, which is always happiness in relationships.
Right.
Do you know what so it's like if we've been all atomized and divided and individualized, politics becomes an impossible endeavor. It's no longer politics. At the higher levels.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we focus on the smaller stuff, because it's where we are.
Do you think that part of what's happening with social media, for instance, like Twitter just is a good example, I feel like, that people are following. I've seen community online, like, believe it or not, like I do believe you can have an online community. I don't think it's as good as an in-person one. It should always lead to your in-person one. But I've met some of my best friends from the internet, which is just fascinating. And then I've met them in person and broken bread with them and et cetera. But so there is an element of socialization and maybe even friendship sometimes online. But when you're just tweeting something on your phone politically or about an opinion, and you're isolated and alone, do you think that that's part of why it feels so divided right now as a nation?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I'm saying this. Someone who might agree with me is saying something similar, but I'm not friends with that person. There's no friendship there.
Yeah.
And then vice versa on the other side. And it's just everyone kind of sending things up into the void of anger, and there's no place for that to land, like you were saying?
Yeah. No, I think that because of the human nature that we've been discussing here, when that is hard to come by, or it's inadequate, or it's weak. We all of us have some friends, or hopefully, or some family, but it's small, and what happens is as we become divided, right? As we become divided, then those places become vulnerable. All right. So even if you're by yourself, if you're totally atomized and by yourself, then you're scared, right? Yeah. This is like the epidemic of anxiety, stress, fear, right? Lonely people are frightened people, right? Because we're social in our nature. It's like I hope this isn't a bad analogy, but it's like a dog, right? When you leave it at home all day, and you come home and the dog's so excited. And the reason why is because dogs have this instinct to be together, and the dog is really upset when he's by himself, right? Like he doesn't want to be by himself.
Yep.
And human beings are like that. And so the sort of trick of social media, and we can talk about this if you want, but the sort of trick is to increase anxiety levels, and then assuage them just enough, right, to keep. So there's just enough of a social hit that it's like all people have, and so they're totally engaged on it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's
totally.
like a drug.
Yep.
And it's like, well, that's not really what you want. You don't. But it gives you just enough of what you're after that you keep coming back, and then it feeds into your it feeds into our laziness, to our apathy, to our vices, that it's easier to get those social hits on the phone than it is in real life, right? And so but what that's doing is amassing power, right? So it's I think that human nature being what it is, we want friendship, we want belonging. Part of friendship is sharing a world, sharing a worldview, sharing a way of life together. And so when you're alone and isolated, you have that drive just like anyone else. And the way in which it manifests itself, and this is something that political philosophers have talked about, is in this kind of desperate conformity.
Okay.
Right? This sort of like desperate tribal conformity. I'm a part of this group, and it's very essential that I am totally a part of this group, and that I'm a member, and I have a belonging here, and how do we identify ourselves by those? We're not those people who are bad, who are wicked, and so we have, there's a sort of psychological coping mechanism in all this, and this is the way in which power is amassed, political power, tyrannical power is amassed, and by creating these sort of desperate individuals.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, this is something that there's a great political philosopher named Hannah Arendt, who escaped Nazi Germany and wrote a wonderful book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And she describes exactly this dynamic as that the first step towards all totalitarian regimes, all sort of absolutist tyrannical regimes, is the atomization and the isolation of the people and the destruction of communities of solidarity. So now, for all the reasons I just described, but then there's another reason, which is that communities of solidarity, communities of love, communities of friendship, communities of the common good, all different ways of saying the same thing, are also communities that have power, right? So because the motivation, the love that animates people is centered, or at least a good portion of it is turned into the community, right? So a bunch of individuals are scared, defenseless, malleable. Now you start talking about families, harder, right? Because there's places where they'll draw lines.
Yeah.
They'll say, no, my family is more important. I'll fight for this.
Yep.
Right? Neighborhoods, cities, the bigger the communities get, the more there's power that's decentralized, because the people who make up that community have a certain amount of power, and they are ordered to each other, right? And so these things become more powerful entities.
Yeah.
So they breaking down those communities, destroying those communities, is a part of the sort of colonialization of tyrannical power. They have to do it. Those are all friction points, resistance points. That's the reason why they go after the family, right? It's the family is the ultimate friction point, and so you need to convert it into just another liberal regime.
Yeah. Do you think do you think that some of these people out there, like, obviously I think everyone can agree that there's a lot of people, especially right now politically, that really want power, right? And do you think that many of them are, when you say going after the family, like doing that intentionally, or doing it like earlier when you said, like, we intrinsically just kind of believe everything that you had started with in the intro, but we don't know if we'd be able to say it. Do you think it's more like it's just happening because that's what power hunger does, or is it something where it's more intentional? Like,
okay, so I think there's different. There are different types of people who have different motivations.
Okay.
And so one of the things, and this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but remind me to come back to this, okay, if I forget, because I think this is an important question. One of the things that distinguishes Christianity is that the Christianity of, say, the ignorant peasant and the Christianity of the master of theology at the University of Paris, okay, in the Middle Ages, all right?
Yeah.
The Christianity of those two is the same, right? It's very different, right? So the person, the master of theology has the concepts, the terminology, the logic, they can articulate this stuff. The peasant just, maybe it's more emotional, maybe it's more pietistic, right? They're saying their devotions, they're doing, but it's the same religion, right? It's the same vision of the world. All right, that is not normal, all right? So most schemes of human life and of human ordering are incoherent rather than coherent. So people with more power at the top historically are more cynical about it. So if you look at like the pagans, right, the more intellectual you get, the less the gods are real. Okay, and the more vulgar you get, the more they're real.
Yeah.
Okay, and so there's an incoherence in it, and in our world, the sort of post-Christian world, we there's a return to that sort of incoherence. All right, so there's definitely people in this world who are after power and money, and who view anything that, and are savvy enough to understand that any place that either resists or, one way of looking at it would be anything that resists, that provides, think about it this way, anything that provides human fulfillment, that doesn't rely upon extrinsic power or on buying things. All right, anywhere where that exists is a entrepreneurial opportunity. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, that looks like something that could be monetized.
Yeah.
That looks like a place where political power could extend, right? And so I think that for a lot of people, there is, I think that there is a sort of cynicism in it. Now, that's not the case. Then there's people lower down or sort of more honest. And for a lot, so if you let's take this liberal sort of starting myth that I began with of the social contract. Within that way of thinking, human interaction is always either contractual, meaning a voluntary exchange, or it's hegemonic. So one person has dominated another person. This is the reason why they think if society's just, it has to be a contract, right?
Okay.
It has to be a voluntary exchange, because those are the only two options. If it's not voluntarily entered into, you must be being held in subjugation. Okay. So if you think about, if you just sort of have internalized that notion, then you look at the family, and it's like, well, the family isn't voluntarily entered into, right? The family has all these kinds of rules and morals and things, family structures. And so what I think there's a lot of people in our world who look at the family and all they see is sort of patriarchal oppression, right? The family is just a small tyrannical regime. Right. And the family is just, so moral codes that govern communities are just oppression. And so the regime then, in a good liberal sense, the regime needs to liberate the inhabitants of these tyrannies so that they can pursue their individual desires, right? So they don't have, morals that are telling them what they can and can't do. So they don't have obligations to their families that are binding them. So they don't, right? And so there's, for a lot of people who have bought into this worldview, or maybe don't even know there's an option, are pursuing happiness in the way in which liberal society tells them you pursue it, which is desire fulfillment. And they're viewing, and within that, you see other orders as always resistance and threats to that, right? Why am I not happy? Because because I have these stupid morals I can't get over. Why do I have these? Because my parents told me them. Why is that the case? Because the family is a part of the superstructure of oppression. Right. So look, we have to go after the family. Right. And so, this is, if you look at like the current situation where you have, where even people's own bodies, right? We're even getting to the point where our own bodies are viewed as these impositions, and that the body should be the way I want it to be, not the way it is. Right. And so again, it's like the extension of this destruction of pre-political forms, or they're not pre-political philosophically, but the way liberals understand them, all the way down to biology. Right. Even biology needs to be subject to our individual desires. So that, I think that there is for a lot of people then a somewhat well-meaning ambition for liberation, total liberation, right? Which is the trap, though, and this is a trap all the way from the Garden of Eden, is that it actually just leads to slavery. Right. So
there's no freedom there.
There's no freedom there. But if you don't know where there's freedom, right, then, and you're desperate for freedom, then that is believable to you when someone tells you that. Right. So and this is the same. I mean, again, it's like when we talk about the pagans, the pre-Christian world, it's like, why did people why did people believe in the gods? Why did they sacrifice to the gods? Why did they do these things? And it's, well, because they were motivated by the same battery of motivations, the same human nature that we all have. And that's what was presented to them as the way in which you assuage it, the way in which you satisfy it. You do these things. But of course, what doing those things did was just amass power and control to the powerful, more to the priests, more to the kings.
Yeah.
Right. So, and which is, of course, the fall. So, so these false, the point, I mean, we're getting to the point where you can see where these false worldviews, these false understandings of what human beings are up to are political in their nature, because human beings are political in their nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't know, that might answer your question?
This is great. This has been a journey. And it's interesting because I didn't mean it to go this way. And he can edit anything we say out here. So I have no idea how much longer we have, but I can talk to you all day long. This is an absolute pleasure. So I didn't mean for it to go this way, but it's a lot. This new polity thing, this thing you guys are trying to do, it's radical.
It is, yes.
In a beautiful, inspirational way, and backed by just like things I've never thought, that I've never put together. The way that you're trying to live here, it's contagious. Like getting to know Mark and Jacob and see like the actual community that is forming here in Steubenville. Mm-hmm. It's different.
I hope so.
And it should be.
Yeah, I hope so.
But it's not. I mean, I travel all over the place, and you don't see this everywhere, and it's inspiring. And I get what you're trying to do.
I think
I can't move here. My wife would be so upset. But I might be here in a month.
But what needs to happen is that communities need to spring up all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. We need to start rebuilding. And it's not. I don't mean to get pessimistic, but I'm going to. It's not about winning, right? I mean, it's about. What I mean is, it's not about like winning the culture war, or winning the political fight. I mean, it's about winning where we can, right? And then being able to enjoy happiness where we can have it, raising our children in that world as, like I was saying earlier, as the beginnings for the alternative. I mean, this world that we're in is not the sheer amount of wealth and power and ambition that is still animating this is not going to peter out soon, right? Like there's a lot of sort of doomsday stuff going on, but this has got some life left in it.
Yeah.
Right. And the building of the alternative, right, simultaneous to it. And this has happened before. Again, I go to the Roman Empire, where you have the birth. You think about the way providence works. You have the birth of Christ, the God King, the God Man, right? At the very moment that you have the first emperor of the Roman Empire, right? That you have the first God Man emperor, and there's the Roman Empire just expands in power and decadence and wealth at the same time that the Christians are growing inside, and the conversion of Romans to the church that's happening at the same time is as much that building of wealth and power and decadence is simultaneously the making of them more and more sad, right? Because that doesn't work, right? So you're desperately doing this, but it's making you miserable, and then you have these because of that. You see how it all kind of works together harmoniously. Because of that, the communities of Christians are growing because they're the alternative, right? And so, and then Romans, the ones who hadn't converted yet, see it, right? And so you think about it, the brilliance of it, the martyrdom that the Christians, or the persecution that the Christians are experiencing at the hand of this empire, is because they're an alternative. It's just like we were talking about how they have to the people who would build hegemonic monstrosities have to destroy communities of solidarity. So they go after them. But it's exactly the communities of solidarity that then weaken their power because people see it, right, and want it. So we got to enter into that dynamic again, right? We are anyway, that's what we're trying to do.
And this is why so you just said you're going to be pessimistic, but you don't seem worried.
Oh no.
And you don't,
yeah.
Which is refreshing in today's world. Like you don't seem, you see the culture wars, you see that's happening, but you're not worried because you've seen it before. We've seen it before.
Yeah, and hope is the virtue. It's often forgotten, I think, because we spend a lot of time talking about faith and charity. Mm-hmm. But hope is the theological virtue of the temporal order, of our order, and hope is rooted in the resurrection. I mean, hope is rooted in the idea that the conviction that it doesn't end here, right? So it's not just like hope, like, oh, I hope I win. It's hope in the sense that, well, what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to kill us? It's like, well, that's a drag. I hope that doesn't happen. But it's not enough to motivate me. That threat. So if because of the truth of Christianity, because of the truth of the resurrection, that threat isn't the ultimate threat. Right. And so because of that, you're empowered. Yeah. You can say, okay, we can do this. Yep. We can do this, and we can, and we have the church, we have grace, we have the sacraments, we have happiness in our communities, we have happiness in our families, and that's what God has given us, and that's where we live. It's okay. Right? Like, I'm not that worried. I mean, I worry, as much as the next guy probably about the world, but I have little kids and stuff, and I see what they're going to be facing. But that's part of the motivation for us doing this, is so there's a place for them to be. Yeah. I'm with you, by the way. So I have 3 little kids, and like that's my worry, is right solely on those 3. Of course. You look at those, you look at them, and what are they going to inherit? But part of that, don't you think that part of that fear that good people have for their children, it's a good thing to have, is because, or at least a part of that, is that they're not willing, I'm not trying to judge people, but maybe this hits home, maybe it's wrong, but that they're trying to hold two contradictory things simultaneously, which is that they want to be in the world, they want to be a part, they want to be normal, but then they realize that normal is going to hurt their kids. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, that is distressing. Yeah. Do you know what like it's obvious little things like, the smartphones for your kids. Like we all know that like a 13-year-old is probably not healthy for them to have a smartphone. Yeah. But everyone else has one. They're in school, and if they don't get one, then they're going to be. And so you have this turmoil inside, mm-hmm. right? And it's very understandable. Yeah. But if you say, no, I'm going to do the radical thing. I'm going to make that change to a Christian, to try to be Christian all the way down. I think some of that goes away. It's like, I'm not trying to be normal. Yeah. I don't care about normal. In fact, normal is a big red flag to me. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And this is where, now we could just go into anything. The homeschooling, but we send ours right now. My wife homeschooled 2 of our kids during COVID, and it was beautiful. But she just says she doesn't feel called to do it. It doesn't feel like maybe equipped. Right. And we don't have we have a great community of people, but like it's not that there's not a bunch of co-ops around, and not yet at least. And so we're open and praying, and every year we'll talk about it. But so we send our kids to a really good Catholic school. But even a really good Catholic school is like normal. It's like I know. So it's normal. Better,
but it's not. But it's not. It's right. Still that, right. That fight is there still.
And that's true. That's always true, right? Yeah. So it's just a matter of degree. So we homeschool. We are a member of this community. We've separated ourselves quite a bit. But we said the same thing. It's like, well, is it okay to watch this movie or that movie? Sure. Is it okay Disney movie? And we're making those compromises. So it's like, it's all a matter of degree. So maybe you never totally escape it. Yeah, certainly we don't. We live in this world, right? Sure. We don't. Yeah. Yeah. But you can probably do better. We can all do better. Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating.
Yeah,
I think this has been a good conversation.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
Normally Josiah busts down the door. Josiah.